content presented in this podcast is based on real events and may contain graphic descriptions of violence, sensitive topics, and explicit language that may be triggering, offensive, or sensitive subjects to some viewers and listeners. Discretion is advised. The purpose of this podcast is to explore and discuss true crime cases for entertainment and educational purposes only. This podcast does not intend to glorify or sensationalize crime, but rather aims to analyze and understand the complexities of human behavior in the criminal justice system. We encourage listeners to approach this content with empathy, critical thinking, respect for the victims and their families. By the time Maryanne was 16, she'd been bounced between foster homes, trafficked, assaulted, and finally arrested for murder. Now, she pulled the trigger on the man who picked her up off the streets. Then she ran. But in the court, her defense didn't just point to the violence she endured. It blamed the state of Washington itself. Maryanne's story isn't an outlier. It's part of a disturbing pattern, one where the foster care system meant to protect funneled kids straight into prison cells. With a deep look inside this broken system through lives of 6 former foster youths, these stories are heartbreaking, infuriating, and urgently important. Today, we're sitting down with Claudia Rowe to talk about how this happens, why it keeps happening, and what actually can be done to change it. So it's time to start the show. Let's hit it. Hi, welcome to another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot. I am your host, Winnie Schrader. I've always wondered what happens with the system that is there to protect children, especially in the foster care system, but they end up more or less pushing these kids towards prison, a life of crime. You would think that kids who are unwanted, people who would want them in their homes to take care of them and give them a home of love and affection that they didn't get from their biological parents. But it seems like these kids have become more or less paychecks to these people. So these kids are just running the streets, no supervision, no guidance, no moral compass. Is that society's problem or is it individual problem? Well, that's why I have Claudia Rowe. She wrote the book Wards of the State. Now, she is an award-winning journalist, and she exposes how devastating the foster care system is and how infuriating you're going to find out the lack of, empathy, humanity, I guess you would say, with these children, and how the state looks at them. So is it the state's fault? Is it society's fault, or is it just kind of a overall group effort of just, not I can't even put words to it because I feel so bad for these kids. It really breaks my heart, and that's really why I wanted to have Claudia Rowe on to talk about this, because I think this is a problem that we really need to address nationwide. This isn't just about the state of Washington. This is a nationwide problem. So, Claudia, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on, Winnie. I'm really glad to be here and talk with you about this.
Yeah, wards of the state. Now, you sat down with 6 individuals who went through the foster care system. Is that correct?
Yeah. 6 main characters. There are others in the book as well, but yes, 6 young people, not so young now, but 6 kids who went through the foster care system, and most of them ended up having some kind of brush with the law, some kind of criminal history. Not all of them, but most did. And I was interested to find out exactly
Mhm.
exactly how that happens, exactly what was the connection between foster care and crime.
Right. And I mean, statistically, I mean, you could just even Google it. Statistically, what is the percentage of foster care children ending up in the prison system? And you'd be astounded of the percentage
It,
of kids that end up that were in the foster care system.
it's
And a
pretty
lot of times,
incredible. Yeah, there's data
yeah.
that shows by the time a kid by the time a kid who grew up in foster care ages out of the system, 59% of those kids will have experienced some kind of lockup by the time they're 26. For a lot of them, it's while they're still in foster care. So they're in so they commit a crime, or they just get picked up for like shoplifting or being trafficked. They go to juvenile detention. Cops pick them up. They go to juvenile detention. There you go. They just got locked up. So a huge proportion of that 59% number, a lot of that happens while they are still in foster care. But most kids are cut from foster care at age 18. They have minimal education, really spotty education. Like 50% of foster youth don't even get a high school diploma. They drop out. So
Yeah.
if you got one, um,
Mhm.
you're 18 years old, you're cut from the system, you have no family that can support you, you have a spotty education at best, no real job skills. So, enormous numbers of foster kids are almost immediately homeless, right? And if
Mhm.
you're homeless, you're very likely to do something that's going to get you picked up and put in a county jail. So that's part of the reason that number 59% is so high. But, even conservative estimates suggest that about 20%, maybe 25% of inmates in state prison are so-called alumni of the foster care system. That is
Right.
crazy. This is supposed
I
to be a
know.
system to help kids, to save kids. And,
Yeah.
you
Uh,
know, and more than half are experiencing some kind of lockup. So that didn't seem like saving kids to me.
Yeah, it's very counterproductive. So, what caused you to pick this topic and research and decide to say, "Hey, I want to reach out to some kids who have experienced this and had to endure, heavy legal problems down the road." But what kind of triggered you to look into this topic and write the book, "Wards of the State"?
Well, I, I've been a journalist, a newspaper journalist for more than 30 years. And most of that time, I was covering juvenile justice, child welfare and foster care, or public schools. Still, so I had some background, but I certainly
Okay.
didn't set out to write a book about foster care. That was not my uh, concept at all. What happened was I am interested in youth crime. I was considering writing about the work of a forensic psychologist who speaks with a lot of juvenile homicide defendants, so kids charged with murder.
Okay.
He said, "Hey, why don't you come sit in on this sentencing? I'm going to be testifying about this teenage girl who shot a man in the head, and maybe you want to just listen to what I have to say." So I thought, okay, I'll do that. He never ended up testifying. He was never called. But the
Oh,
sentencing itself ended up stretching over 3 days for this teenage girl. Very unusual. It was supposed to be like a 2-hour proceeding on one day. It ended up stretching over 3 days. And by the end of it, I thought, oh, wow, this is a lot more than just a teenage murder. This is like almost all murder stories. I connected to something much broader. And the more I
yeah.
zoomed out and out and out, oh, it was connected to her experience in foster care. And that is what her defense was saying, that foster care itself was partly to blame for this murder that she had committed. I got really intrigued by that, and I wanted to go deeper. And in studying her story, her name is Maryanne, in looking at her case and her story, it just broadened out and out and out. And I ended up looking at what pushes kids in foster care toward crime, toward lockup. How common is this? And here we are. Now we have this book with 6 kids.
Okay. So Mary Ann, at the age of 16, she was in foster care. What led up to her murdering a man. I mean, like, how
Right.
did she get to that point?
So so when I encountered Maryanne in court, and she, you know, she was a teenager, she was completely I don't even know how to say it, overwhelmed, I think, by you
Mhm.
know, seeing her in court. I saw a kid. I saw a kid terrified, overwhelmed, angry. She was crying. Her face was red.
Mm.
The first thing I wanted to do was find out, is she some kind of aberration, or, you know, how common it was her path to this point. So
Mhm.
Maryanne had been taken into foster care when she was about 10. So not as a little baby, right? There are a lot of
Okay.
kids. We often think of foster care as for babies and very young children born to addicted parents, drug addicted
Mhm.
parents. But there are a lot of young people who are taken into foster care as adolescents, or shortly
Mhm.
before adolescence. And that was
Yeah.
Maryanne's case. Her path was really typical. She was not an aberration. Of course, her crime, not every foster kid is going to shoot
Right.
someone in the head, but her path to that point was really standard. She was in about 5 foster homes, and she was adopted out of foster care when she was about 12. And then her adoptive family found themselves unable to handle her. It was a bad match, or it wasn't a well-supported match. They were sort of terrified and horrified by her behavior. Her behavior was really standard for a lot of kids in foster care. A lot of kids in foster care have had no experience kind of operating in a, like a traditional or conventional
Yeah.
family setting. Like sitting down for dinner was totally
Mhm.
bizarre to Maryanne. Like family dinner, she didn't get it. She had minimal experience of anything like that, certainly not in her childhood. And she had so much trauma before she was even taken into foster care, that there were serious behavior problems before she was ever in foster care. So then she's in foster care. She's in like 5 different homes. She's adopted. Her adoptive family, after about 2 years, they're like, we can't deal. We can't. She terrified them. So they
Mhm.
kicked her back to the system. This shocked Maryanne. She had no idea that it was possible to be unadopted. A lot of people don't know that, but it is
Mhm.
possible. And a lot of kids in foster care never talks about this, but an enormous number of adoptions from foster care fall apart because the kids are not what their adoptive families anticipate, right? By the time
Okay.
they're adopted, um, like I said, sort of, I think that Maryanne's family probably thought, love will be enough, and we'll put our arms around her and it'll be all good. But love is not enough.
Right.
You need skills, you need support, you need a realistic expectation of what you're getting. And for Maryanne, she was like, love? You don't even know me. How can you love
Right.
me? We haven't grown up together. You're just meeting me. And it happened really fast. Maryanne had, there's this really kind of ugly experience called adoption fairs, where kids literally sit in a room and they're doing like arts and crafts, and families walk by like checking them
Oh.
out like livestock. Like, are you the kid we want to adopt? And in Maryanne's case, like I said, she was about 12. She was the oldest child in the room because most families want to adopt very young children.
Yeah.
She was already feeling like weird about that. And she had been through a few of these adoption fairs. But then this family sat down with her. They decided they wanted to take her in. It happened really fast. There were like a couple of lunch dates and one overnight, and boom, she's there in their home.
Oh, wow.
And the actual adoption proceeding is very fast. It's a court proceeding, like 15 minutes. And there was sort of a honeymoon period, but pretty quickly, this family realized they couldn't handle her. And so they kicked her back to foster care. That experience was a profound rejection for her, for Maryanne,
Right.
even though she would tell you she didn't like her foster family and it was bad, and they, she has all kinds of negative things to say, just as they do about her. But still, the experience of being sort of saved but then rejected, which is true, she was rejected, that kind of rejection is what a psychologist in court said was profound enough to seriously affect her behavior. So by the time she was sort of dumped from this family and kicked back into foster care, she went into another foster home. At that point, she was a chronic runaway, even though she actually loved this final foster home. She loved that parent. And I think it's important for people to know, when kids run away, especially foster kids, a lot of times it's not abuse in the foster home that they're running from. They're running toward something. They're looking for their biological family, even if that family neglected or abused them. This was definitely the case for Maryanne, who was always looking for her mother on the streets. They're also running toward other kids on the street, like connection, a sense of family, kind of sort of what attracts kids to gangs. This sense of, other kids who get me, other kids who are also in foster care, who also have terrible home situations. So she was kind of running the streets with kids, and I guess you would say allowing herself to be trafficked. There are, multiple ways that this happens, right? So there was an ad on an online message board, kind of a Craigslist thing online.
Okay.
There were multiple ways that Maryanne was trafficked. And the guy that she killed, there's no hard evidence that he was trafficking her. I'm not saying that he was, but it does look like maybe you could say maybe he was going in that direction. I think that there's pretty strong indication that he was going in that direction. In any event, he pulls over. It's 2:00 in the morning. It's a freezing cold night in February in Seattle, and she's been driving around with him all night. She barely knows where she is. He wants to have sex with her. They do have sex, and afterward, apparently while he appeared to be sleeping, he appeared to be, or at least laying down in the driver's seat, she shot him. There are a lot of ways to look at that, right? She initially claimed rape. That first she said that he didn't force her to have sex. That's what she first told the police. Then later, she told her defense team that there was forced sex. I would say that if you are a 16-year-old girl in a car with a 21-year-old guy, and you're driving around all night and you don't know where you are and it's freezing cold and you don't want to be there, did he hold her down and strangle her and force her to have sex? I don't think so, but I think that there are a lot of ways you could say it was coerced, that she was in a position where she didn't have a whole lot of choices, right?
Right.
In any event, she shot him.
Okay.
And so here we are.
Yeah, and that could, we don't know exactly what happened in that car too. I mean, she could have felt threatened, or like her life threatened at some point. I mean, who knows what he
He had
said.
a gun. I mean, the gun that she used to shoot him was his gun.
Yeah. So I mean, it's like, she's 16 years old.
Yeah.
She's on the streets, and more or less he's possibly leading to pimping her out, basically. You know, she probably felt like a caged animal, like her back was up against a wall, and you know, uh, and with her, not it's not that she doesn't have empathy for people, but it's almost like she disassociates humanity when it comes to these situations, and when it comes to like her foster care families, on the surface she's like, yeah, they didn't love me. That's, to me, that's almost like a smoke screen for her. Deep down she's hurting. She's doing that up front because, especially with foster kids, they're going from home to home to home to home. Nothing is ever feels like something permanent,
Right.
something that they, something tangible, foundation for them. So it's just like they learn to not attach to anyone. They learn to disassociate with, and that's probably why when she would go out on the streets, be amongst her peers in situations like her, she probably felt more like it was a family because they could all relate to each other.
So yeah, you
Um,
totally hit it. This thing about what I discovered in doing the research for this book, which was 5 years, it's exactly that. There's an aspect of foster care that there's a very strong aspect of foster care that undercuts connection, right? Because
mhm.
the kids know they will be moving on. They are, if they're not adopted, they're moving on. And the foster parents too know that. And so there's this mutual kind of shielding your heart thing that goes on. And the kids also know that money is attached to them, that they bring money to the foster parent, state money support for foster
Yep.
care. They know that. Maryanne knew it when she was 10 years old. I mean, kids know it. That as well um, undercuts any chance for a real bond, a real connection. Also, they're caseworkers, the social workers who are managing each child's case. Those folks change all the time. So do the kids' therapists. They just change without warning. So this just is constant churn of people in their lives, and they are constantly churning, moving from home to home. So exactly right. The system itself kind of enforces a lack of connection and a lack of empathy ultimately.
Mhm.
And so what has been one of the most fascinating parts of the whole research process is seeing Maryanne change over time. So I first met her when she was a teenager and had just been sentenced for murder, but I've now, it's 6 years since that point, and I have seen an enormous change in her. The most profound change happened when she was locked up in a youth facility, a youth prison initially, um, because it was stable. It was really the first place she had ever known, really in her life, where she could be sure she wasn't going to be kicked out. She wasn't going to be jumped. She was going to be fed. She was going to be warm. And the person dealing with her every day, her case manager, was going to be the same person. And
Yep.
that's what happened. She formed a relationship, a trusting relationship with a responsible adult. She was in a place where she could kind of count on what the day was going to be and where she was going to be that night. And I mean, it's really shocking that something so simple as like basic
Right.
stability would affect an enormous change. And a lot of people ask me, is that because, the youth facility had great therapy or fantastic education programs? No, it was supposed to, but it didn't. It wasn't such a great facility. But in
Yeah.
contrast to foster care, it was better.
It's what she needed. She needed that structure and stability to get her kind of not just back on track to creating normal relationships and just a normacy in life. Like, this is how normal life is. You're on a schedule, you do this, associate with people throughout your day, same people throughout the day, whether you're in school and your family. And the problem is like these foster kids that went to school during the day, they would get that during the day, but then they would go home at night to an unstructured, unsupervised, loving home. So it
Well,
was like it wasn't
I don't want to
constant.
say that foster homes are unsupervised, unstructured, or unloving. I mean, love.
Mhm.
I mean, there are all kinds of foster homes, but I don't want to
Yeah.
sit here and say foster
No, not
homes are
all
like
of them.
a hotbed of abuse or anything. I think Maryanne was in some pretty good foster homes, but
Mhm.
the structure of foster care is while they say it's about finding permanence, the structure of the system is instability and impermanence, because you're moving around, right?
Right.
And there are other kids in the book who, well, they're not kids now, but they were kids in foster care. Like the next person I met in trying to figure out how common was Maryanne's path, how her experience, that was the first thing I needed to get a grip on. And
Mhm.
I was pointed toward, I was looking at the research, and I was looking at these numbers that I just cited before, like 59% end up in some kind of lockup, and 20% of state prison inmates are alumni of the foster care system. I was sort of aghast at these numbers that I don't think most people realize. And I was pointed toward a guy who was in a maximum security prison, had a life sentence, which he got shortly
Uh-huh.
after being cut from foster care. He also committed a terrible crime, a horrible murder. He stabbed this young woman, and she bled to death. He got a life sentence. But from within prison, his name is Arthur Longworth. Inside prison, he started to, after many years of solitary confinement, because he was pretty violent,
Yeah.
really prone to fighting when he got to prison. But as he grew up, he again went very, very young. Got this life sentence when he was 20. Within prison, he started to realize, hey, everybody around me I know from foster care. Everybody around me was with me in the group homes in foster care or in
Really?
their kids. Yes, Arthur
Oh
Longworth
my god.
perceived this connection. Like, wait, everyone around me was in the state child welfare system. What is the deal with this? And so he began to study it, and he convened this group of inmates, all of them former foster kids in maximum security prison. And they're like, what is going on here? And they began to sort of quantify it and reach out to lawmakers and policymakers and say, hey, we have something to say here. And Arthur kind of conceived this idea of a cycle, like a lot of people talk about the foster care to prison pipeline. And Art always says he doesn't think of it as a pipeline. He thinks of it as more of a circle, a cycle.
Okay.
Like foster care sort of churning out kids so unconnected, so cut off, so without empathy and without any kind of reasonable education or skills. He's churning out kids so unprepared to live productively as adults in kind of mainstream society, that homelessness or crime become kind of like the obvious next thing that's going to happen.
Yep.
So to Art, he was like, the system is sort of making new inmates, like it's creating these future inmates, and those people have kids, and then those kids, because their parents are in prison, those kids are taken into foster care, and it's just this cycle that happens and happens. That is what he perceived from within prison. And he's a pretty incredible person. He also became a really good writer while locked up, and he was able to reach out from within these like locked cement block walls and connect with legislators and begin to sort of bring this up to public consciousness right at the same time that I was looking at this. Just coincidentally, I was like, wait, what is this research? What are these numbers? As a reporter, I was looking at that. And then Art, as a lifer, was like, wait, how come everybody around me is somebody I grew up with in foster care? And so we then connected, and he becomes the next major character in the story.
Oh, wow. Well, yeah, and hey, that to me is what prison reform is. He had an epiphany and he ran with it, and he's using his time wisely to educate himself, to educate others, to research, to reach out. I mean, he's in prison and he's reaching out to lawmakers to change the laws to help protect these kids so they don't end up like him. And
Right.
that's amazing. That to me, kudos to him. Kudos, because Not many people in prison do that. You hear of stories of them like trying to research their case to see if they can get appeals, but he's actually like trying to make real change. That's awesome. So what was his story going into the foster care system and how he ended up where as a lifer in jail?
So one of the things in Wards of the State in the book, one of the things I'm trying to show readers is how long this has been going on. So
Mhm.
Art Longworth is now 60 years old. And I don't want to say too much because there is some like
Oh, for sure.
surprises that happen with his story that are in the book. So I hope people will want to check it out. But, you know, when Maryanne committed her crime, she was 16 and it was in 2016.
Okay.
Art is, much, much older, and he was in foster care in the late 70s and early 80s. He committed his crime and he committed many crimes, but the serious crime that got him locked away, 1985. So Art was from a kind of, I would say, like a working class family, and in an area not in Seattle, sort of a rural suburb of Seattle. I mean, the area around
Okay.
Seattle has changed a lot since the 1970s. But the point of the book is to show how long the same thing has been going on. It's not a new trend or a recent spike, and it's not a secret except to the general public. People have no idea. But within the
Mhm.
system, the social workers and folks in the system have known about this connection forever. In fact, I should just say, the first person ever executed in the then brand new state of Wyoming in 1892, foster kid,
Oh,
17-year-old, yep, 17-year-old
wow.
foster child. Like this
Oh.
connection with, kids that are sort of cut off from any real support, any sustained, ongoing, like heart support. And they're just sort of out there and and commit crimes, often in sort of out of desperation.
Mhm.
Um, I should say, like Arthur Longworth's crime was not a sex crime. He did not sexually assault. I mean, it was really kind of it was, I think, originally conceived as a robbery. It doesn't even matter at this point. But a
Mhm.
lot of this stuff is kind of back against the wall desperation, even though people will say, oh, sociopaths without empathy. that is not what I found. So like I said, this first kid first person actually legally executed in the state of Wyoming in 1892, former foster kid. So this connection is an old thing.
Have you ever felt like something or someone was trying to tell you something? That inner nudge, that quiet whisper from the universe, with intuition sharpened by years of spiritual connection and a deep-rooted gift. Winnie Schrader delivers readings that are compassionate, insightful, and shockingly accurate. Whether you're facing a crossroads healing from heartache, or just curious what the cards reveal, Winnie creates a safe, sacred space to explore your journey. This isn't fortune cookie fluff. This is honest, intuitive guidance from someone who's helped hundreds find clarity, closure, and confidence. If you've been waiting for a sign, this is it. Book your session now at lovelotustarot.com and take control of your journey. That's lovelotustarot.com. Winnie's sessions are personal, powerful, and often life-changing. That's lovelotustarot.com.
Art was running away from home, from his regular biological home, really young. Bad situation at home for him. So he was kind of living in the woods and on riverbanks. You have to think about Washington State in the 1970s, pretty rural. This is way before he was taken into foster care, but he ended up being sort of picked up by cops after trying to rob somebody. He was not even a teenager yet, trying to rob somebody on the streets of Seattle. He took off with this bag of money,
Mhm.
and he immediately got jumped by other kids on the street and beaten and ended up in the hospital, and the cops found him and they put him in foster care. Art always says that the problem with his path was that he was not taken into a family, but sent into group homes. So group homes, are one of the major ways, one of the major reasons that there's such a high rate of criminal overlap with foster kids, because in group homes, kids fight one another. I mean, Art was like often the youngest and was constantly being beaten up. At one place, he thought he was going to be killed and just buried in the woods and forgotten. I mean, he was definitely afraid for his life. So group homes, and that is in the 1970s and like 1980, still the same. There's like enormous amounts of violence within group homes, kids fighting one another or kids assaulting staff. The staff call the police and somebody gets locked up. And there you go. You just contributed again to that 59% number who experienced lockup. Right. While they're in fact not even out of foster care yet. So Art went through a number of group homes, never was adopted, nor was he taken into a sort of family situation. And finally, he was kicked out of what became his last group home. He was also a runaway frequently. He was finally kicked out of what would be his last group home for having sex with too many of the girls there, to be blunt. But one of the staff there, a young man who Art says had sexually assaulted him, said, "Hey, I will take Art. I will be his foster dad." And the state was like, "Okay, great, fine." So there goes, 16-year-old Art off with this guy who has already groped him. And they live together for a couple of months. The same stuff happens. And then Art's like, "Yeah, I'm out of here." He's doing whatever he needs to do. And he says, "I'm out of here." And the state goes, "Okay, you're done. You're done with foster care." He's 16 years old. And the state of Washington said, Art Longworth emancipated himself. So there he is on the street. He hasn't been to school since 7th grade. Dude is 16 years old. So, what do we think is going to happen?
Right. Exactly. He's going to do what he has to do to survive. And if you don't have a job, you don't have an education, the only other thing you can do is steal, rob, have a life of crime to get.
He did rob a lot of people. Yeah, he did rob a lot of people and burglarized homes. And the stuff is sort of, I guess you could say, escalating until he meets this young woman, Cindy. Really terrible, terrible case. But in prison, Art Longworth changed. And he will tell you the same thing. And he will tell you, he says it all the time. He says it in the book, foster care. I was an animal when foster care raised me to be an animal. And that's what I was when I got out. And here we are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, like I said, I mean, like prison reform, like that is the type of person that deserves a pardon, if you ask me. I mean, because obviously he's acknowledged his change and he's trying to do things for the better. Doesn't want kids to go through what he went through, especially with group homes. Are group homes as popular as they were? I mean, are they just as...
They're used less, and different states use them at different rates. So the book, your listeners should know, the book is national. Maryanne and Art were kids in Washington State, but there are a bunch of other kids. So there's a young woman in Texas who's in the book, who grew up in a group home. And her situation is not the same as Art or Maryanne's. She did spend a little bit of time in juvenile detention, but her kind of post-foster care life has been more about homelessness. Like I said, there was a little bit of time in juvenile detention, so she's part of that 59% who experienced some kind of lockup. But I wouldn't put her in the same category as Art or Maryanne. Her issues are more around homelessness. But she did grow up in a group home, and one of the things that they're not all group homes are like incredibly violent. The place where she was living outside of Houston, her name is Monique. The place where Monique was outside of Houston was conceived to be much more of a sort of therapeutic facility for kids with either developmental or behavioral problems. And that was Monique. Very much sort of therapy oriented. She did okay when she was there. The kids all, they give the kids clothes to wear. So they're kind of wearing a uniform. Everything is very, very regulated, regimented, even like the stuff on her walls, like decorations on the walls in her room had to be approved. I mean, everything is incredibly regimented. She did okay. But when you grow up from age, 14 to 18 in a environment like that, where you never sort of take on gradually increasing levels of responsibility, like a teenager in a conventional family, you have an allowance and you learn to manage money, and maybe you learn to drive and you go on dates, and maybe you have an after school job, like all sort of standard ways of like learning how to be an adult while you're still a kid in a family. Like you're learning these gradually increasing levels of responsibility. In a group home, no. For Monique, everything's done for her. Somebody's, making her food and laundry and all that. They're driving her to school in a van, like all the stuff. She's not allowed to have an after school job because she has to be back at the group home by curfew, So when she finally is 18 and they're like, okay, goodbye, and she goes to college, she completely spun out. She had no way of knowing how to structure her life. She had no practice. So she didn't, she dropped out after the first semester, and presently she's living in her car. She, that's the other side of group homes, that even if they're not like violent, there's this thing. One of the people in the book, who is a former foster kid and did not go to prison or jail or anything like that, and became an incredibly successful activist. He says in group homes, there's this learned passivity. That's what happened to Monique. This kind of no opportunity to like build the muscles for how to structure a life, see a goal, go after it. Doesn't know how to do that. So again, it's not because there were like villains in foster care, like mean foster parents. Of course there are, but that's not the main thing. It's not about villain foster parents or uncaring social workers. It's not about that. It's about the structure of the system undercuts healthy development of young people. It undercuts knowing how to run your life. It undercuts knowing how to attach to another person and bond with them. And one of the things that the book goes into is, it's not only like, oh, it's good to bond to people. That's nice. No, it's not about that. Attachment actually has chemical effects in your brain. So the inability to attach or to bond, to connect in any kind of real way affects brain chemistry, and vice versa. Your brain chemistry can affect, your ability to attach, right? And that is why Art Longworth goes, I was raised to be an animal. I didn't have empathy. It's that kind of thing. It's this like mechanized abuse of the system, this kind of machine that is funneling kids through without kind of building them up with the tools for healthy development.
Well, that's one thing I wanted to know is, you hear a lot of these stories. So this kid, he's been to 5 different foster homes. Well, why is he bouncing between 5 different foster homes? I mean, what's the consistent issue of why kids are being bounced around? Because like if I were to say, okay, I want to become a foster parent, I would try and hold on to that child as long as possible or until they got adopted or they're 18. I would not. I would treat that child or try to raise that child, whether I know it's temporary or not. I'm going to be a mom to that child 110%. So I don't understand why And I know a lot of families become foster families because there is a financial incentive to become one. But like why are kids being bounced around between multiple foster homes?
There are a couple of reasons. One reason is behavior problems. So
Okay.
a lot of times kids of various ages, not only teenagers, so we've just talked about like how, I mean, any kid who comes into foster care has already endured some kind of trauma in their
Right.
biological family, even if it's not abuse. And most of the time it's not. The abuse is not the main reason kids are taken into foster care. The main reason is neglect. So, and so a kid could be at their biological home, for instance, and say their mom is drug addicted. Their mom isn't beating them up, but their mom is also unable to feed them in a regular way, or they're there are no middle class kids in foster care. I should say that at the outset. It's only poor kids. So you have serious poverty, you have drug addiction. These things are traumatic to a kid, even if they are attached to their parent. They love their parent, or maybe they fear their parent, but they still love their parent. Simply the act of being removed from a home and put into foster care is itself a trauma, right?
Right.
And you
For any
plunk that
child.
kid down with strangers, right? So the
Yeah.
kid doesn't think to themselves, oh, wow, my mom sucked and I'm so glad I'm with these strangers who are going to feed me.
Yeah, they're
That is not what
scared.
kids think. That is not how humans work. And there are all kinds of stories in the book about kids who run from their foster placements trying to find their biological parent, even if that parent attempted to kill them.
Right.
Like that connection that is like biologically determined. It is imprinted in all of us. You can't undo it.
Right.
So kids come into foster care, they've endured trauma in their homes, or even simply the trauma of being removed from their home and plunked into foster care. And there's a lot of behavior that shows up, and a lot of foster parents are like, I am not down for it. This is too draining. This is too destructive. Maybe I have my own children and they're afraid of this new kid coming in. There are all kinds of reasons why a foster parent goes, forget it. I don't want to deal with, it could even be defiance. Maybe the kid is like, F you or whatever, a lot of times I'm trying to keep it clean for your.
I know. No, I'm just like, I just find it fascinating that people who want to be foster parents give up so easily. I'm like, like you have Maryanne, for instance, they're like, oh, her behavior. I'm like, dude, have you, obviously you've never looked anything up of trying to raise a preteen and a teenage girl. They're monsters. Just alone, they're monsters.
So there is, you're hitting it right. There is this kind of like often unstated kind of tacit belief, like these kids should be grateful. We're saving them. And where is your gratitude? Your behavior doesn't say gratitude. There is kind of this like implicit attitude often of, well, you're not acting grateful, and so we're pissed off at you, and we don't like that. Also, foster care itself, states have financial incentives to get kids adopted. They get more money from the feds if they get kids adopted. So if you're a foster parent and you're like, well, I'm fine with this kid, but I'm not going to adopt them, the state has an incentive to move that kid around to a place where they might get adopted. So that's another reason that kids get moved around, because there are financial incentives for adoption.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
So that's bad, right? I mean, it's done well-intended. It's important for your listeners to understand.
Yeah.
Well-intended, right? Like, oh, kids need stability. Kids need permanency. That means adoption. So with that kind of sort of concept, that's why kids are moved without really realizing, but what does this do to the kid? That's sort of the main takeaway I found in researching the book, that foster care is this system that we've had for more than a century. It's like 120 years old, roughly, 100, 125. But it's almost the same as it was a century ago. It's not that different. It's this inherited system that we have, but our understanding of brain science, particularly juvenile brain science, is like way different than a century ago, right?
Yeah, totally.
Right.
I mean, they just realize our brains don't stop developing till we're 25.
Right. So it, like in the past 20 years, that recognition of juvenile brain development, and then it goes into your mid-20s, that's only 20 years old. But our foster care system is not aligned with what we now know about brain science and what kids need for healthy development. We still have this 100-year-old system that was conceived, again, well-intended, but just out of like a lot of ignorance. And now we still have this system because there isn't the political will to go, whoa, let's step back and really look at what we have. One of the reasons is it's kids and they don't vote, and right. But but the other thing is it's really hard to step back and retool and reconceive and rebuild a system when there are kids in it right now. It would be like, like repairing a plane while it's flying, right? Like,
yeah.
Not an easy thing
Can't
to
do that.
do. I don't mean to like minimize it and say, oh, it should be fixed. This is a hard thing to do.
Yeah, it's systematic. You have to take it with care and stride and piece by piece. So you can't just say, oh, let's just restructure it all. I mean, yeah, you can't do that.
So that's the main thing. We have a system that is not aligned to the way human brains work, frankly. It just doesn't line up with what people need to grow up healthy and mentally sound. And so you have a lot of kids who leave foster care separate from like, no family support and spotty education because of kind of some brain science stuff. And the book has a little bit of it, not too heavy, not like too dense or anything. But essentially, a lot of kids in foster care have elevated cortisol. It's like a stress hormone, and it's elevated. And in all people, there's kind of a sort of peaks and valleys during a day in normal sort of cortisol rates, right? Like up and down. But in foster kids, it's elevated and it stays up there. And when you have elevated cortisol and it doesn't have the normal sort of peaks and valleys, that shows up in difficulty sleeping, difficulty concentrating, difficulty with emotional resilience. So the things that affect all of us in life, like insults or disappointments or humiliation or frustration, all the things that come at all of us every day, particularly when you're a young adult trying to start out and get a job and make your life and build a career, you know, like a lot of stuff comes at you. For foster kids, a lot of foster kids do not have the resilience to kind of weather the standard frustrations of life because of this sort of elevated cortisol thing that happens with lack of attachment. So that's what the book is sort of saying, right?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean, because with my health issues, when my body goes through flare-ups, my cortisol levels go up and they stay up because they're trying to come back. Cortisol is a hormone in your body. It's almost like a steroid. It helps maintain mood and stuff, but it also helps with pain. So usually the morning, your cortisol levels at its highest, and throughout the day, it's supposed to dip. So that's why at night you feel more of your aches and pains. Well, my body tries to elevate its cortisol to combat aches and pains for me because of all my health issues with lupus and stuff. So yeah, I don't sleep. I'm agitated. I just, you're just constantly on edge and crabby. And
right now, imagine that you're a 15-year-old girl,
teenager, in a bouncing between foster. Oh my gosh, that's like just a recipe for a bomb to go off.
Right, exactly.
Oh,
And a
God. I
lot of
know.
parents are not, I mean, it would be hard for anyone. It's hard for any parent of a teenager to deal with that behavior, then be like, oh, well, you're not even my blood relative.
Yeah, I
Like,
can
why
give
do I
you
have to deal
away.
with this? Right. So that is
Oh,
one of the
that's
reasons
sad.
why kids move around a lot.
Now, is there any type of vetting? I mean, is there one thing I don't know what the vetting process is currently defining, vetting homes to become foster homes, but is that maybe where we need reform is to
Very
get
smart
better,
question. Yes. So there are a
you
couple
know?
of efforts underway that are addressing some of this problem. One of
Okay.
them is kinship care. It is the practice of placing a foster kid with a relative or a family friend rather than with a stranger. So it's
Okay.
shocking that this would be like new, right? Like you'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. Somebody who knows the kid, somebody the kid
Right?
already trusts, right? But this is very recent because traditionally the attitude has been, oh, if you come from a problematic, struggling family or a family that has like drug addiction, well, then probably all your relatives are drug
Yeah, that's
addicted and
no.
problematic too. That is sort of how the system has operated. We need to obliterate your bad past and put you in this new world where you don't have any connection to the trauma of your past, which is, as we've just said, this is not how human beings work. They have a bond. Kids have a bond to their biological people no matter what. And so removing them and pretending you can obliterate that connection, it doesn't work. Doesn't work.
Yep.
So kinship care is increasing. It is better. The thing that's new about it is giving state money to relatives because, grandparents have always taken in, their grandchildren if their own child can't parent well. Like that is standard
Yeah.
for so many families, multi-generational. The change is giving them money to do it because if you're 75 years old and you've been saving for retirement and then you suddenly take in a couple of kids that are like
Yep.
your grandchildren, well, you just are draining your retirement savings, parenting and spending money on these kids that you never anticipated having to care for when you were 75 years old.
Right.
Right. So
Yeah.
that has been a real problem. And finally, states are beginning to say, oh, well, we could license a relative to be a foster parent for just that kid, just that one kid, their kin, rather than
Okay.
licensing for any foster kid in the state. No, just that kid. And we can give you some money for that. So that is a change. It is happening. It is better. The other thing is what you mentioned, better recruitment, better training, and better matching of foster parent to kid. Like don't just because the system does treat foster parents kind of not that great, kind of as a way station, kind of as like a babysitter, kind of
Yeah, it's
like,
a dumping
oh,
ground.
here,
Here's a
you
kid.
give them a room and some meals, and like that's all we expect of you. So we're not really looking for you to bond with the kid. That again, bad idea. You do need somebody
Mhm.
who's gonna, but traditionally, if a kid is moved out of a foster home, that foster parent is not supposed to keep up with them. They're not supposed to maintain a relationship with them. They're not supposed to be on the phone. Hey, how are you doing in your new placement? How's it going? Like all this kind of well-intended, but totally backwards thinking.
Right.
So there is an effort called Quality Parenting Initiative,
Good.
which has been adopted by 10 states, I think, and it's speaking to exactly that. We need to make it better for foster parents too. Like there are also efforts about professional foster parents so that they don't have another job. This is their only job because a lot of foster parents are mandated to have other employment so that that's to make it so, oh, you're not only doing it for the money, for the foster care stipend,
Mhm.
you have other income. But the fact is that foster care money does count for a lot of foster parents. I mean, they are counting on it. So
I would
there are some efforts underway to sort of mitigate some of this stuff, but
okay.
still It's still the same system with these little reforms kind of happening at the edges that might make some improvement, but I would say we need a whole different concept of what we want from foster care, what we intend it to be, because
Yeah.
really it's a holding system, right? We're holding you until you're 18 or you get adopted. That's what it is. We're like holding you rather than a healing system. We know you endured trauma. That's why you're in our system, but really we're just holding you until the next stage. And that is creating really terrible outcomes.
Yeah. They're not creating people who can be contributing to society, functional, educated. They're just they're basically just surviving till they're 18 and then they just cut them loose.
Right.
And it's sad because there are lots of children in the foster care system. And, a lot of kids too, when they go into the foster care system, then they end up going back to their, like if there was like a court where they had to clean up the house and show that they can maintain a clean home. And then the kid goes back and then next thing you know, a year from there, they're right back to where they were. So then they got to pull the kid back out again. I mean, it's, we have to figure out a way to not have to pull kids from their home to begin with, but to help it be an easier transition, especially, because, people do have addictions. People, they do fail their children. It just happens as, we're not perfect, we're humans. My nephew, we had to take in our nephew because his mother was a drug addict and eventually she died from a drug overdose. And it was a fight to try and not keep him out of the foster care system and keep him with us. Now, we did get his Social Security check because his father passed away when he was 3. So he was getting Social Security checks from his dad's passing. But yeah, we didn't get any state-funded money to help raise him or anything. But it was a struggle because of the way he was brought up. And we were only in his life, not permanently. Like she would drop him off, say, can he spend the night or the weekend? And then she'd be gone for a week and a half.
Right.
And we would have this kid with us. But seeing the breakdown of his spirit as a child, dealing with all these traumas and things like that, it's very sad to see a kid. And I can't imagine these foster kids. They're enduring this daily.
I mean,
and
and
it breaks my heart.
Yeah. I mean, there are certainly foster kids who beat the odds, and it is beating the odds. And there are kids who beat the odds and go on to be, very successful, high functioning lawyers and activists, like I mentioned. And they are in the book too, but it is beating the odds. I mean, fewer than 5% of kids who grow up in foster care ever earn a 4-year college degree. And I'm not saying a college degree is the be all and end all and the magic key or anything, but if 59% are getting locked up and fewer than 5% are getting any kind of 4-year bachelor's degree, well, those are the outcomes of a system we're spending $30 billion on every single year.
I know, it's not working.
So I'm not saying it's wasted money. I'm saying the money is not being spent in the right way, obviously.
Yeah, it's not being executed properly because, this whole system was meant to change those numbers.
Right.
59% should be graduating with college degrees and only 5% should be ending up in prison, not the other way around.
Right.
So, well, thank you so much, Claudia. Again, the book was Boards of the State. I will have a link for that in today's description, along with your website. And what is your X handle? It's at Rowe Report, right?
Correct.
Or is it okay? At Rowe on X. Oh,
yes.
And then your website is what?
Is ClaudiaRoweJournalist.com.
Perfect. And I'll have a link for that in the show notes. So please, guys, rate and review these books. It helps these books get seen on, like Amazon, Barnes and Noble. The more reviews they get, the more it starts popping up in ads and things like that. And this is a topic that needs to be talked about especially in the political climate that we're in. Apparently, a lot's changing. So maybe this is a time to try and squeeze in some stuff while everything's changing to get it done, because it seems like, yeah, this has been kind of a process that has needed a change for a long, long time. And we don't have a long, long time to actually get it done. We got to start getting something done
Yeah.
that's going to actually make an impact.
I think
with
people are
this.
ready. Like this connecting the dots, like, oh, this system, oh, it feeds this other larger system, the prison system and the homelessness services system. That's what foster care is feeding, these other larger, even more expensive systems. And I think people are getting that. Like, whoa, whoa, these things are all together, and we need to be smarter about how we handle these systems.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Claudia. Again, the book Wards of the State, read it, rate it, and if you have any questions, is there a place where people can like email if they have a story they would like to share with you?
Sure. On my website, claudiarowejournalist.com, there is a contact button. You can email me there. You can find me on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, at Rowe Report. You can write me there.
X is so weird to me. I was like, are you on X? Well, I was on Twitter. That sounds it just sounds better. I don't know why. Well, thank you guys so much, and I hope to see you all next week. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot. And until our next case, my armchair detectives, stay safe, stay vigilant, and stay aware. I'll see you right here next week on Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot.